Hello, I'm Dave March, and welcome to Land of Confusion, and this is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Don Tillman, right here.
And we're on bringing you to the latest episode of Land of Confusion, and the Ricochet show for members by members. And today, after Boss Mongo asked us, we asked him who we'd like to see, we have Skipsul here. And though we're not really seeing him because through the power of the internet, we can be anonymous about some things. He doesn't want to show, he wants to keep his politics kind of separate from his work life. So we're allowing him to communicate us through the great power of the internet here.
I was suggesting a disguise would be pretty cool.
Okay. Well, yes, we could have probably given him a picture of like a man.
Mustache.
Yeah, mustache, ears, and like all that stuff. So we have a number of questions for you that I set in the head.
Yes.
Okay, so where were you born, and what was it like growing up there?
I was born in the same region I am now, which is the Columbus, Ohio, greater Columbus area.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of respects, it was kind of an idyllic Midwestern place to grow up. Columbus at the time was sort of the forgotten city of Ohio. And everybody knew about Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo. Columbus was nice and quiet. That's no longer the case.
Oh, yes.
But at the time, we enjoyed a reputation as being a cow town. So nothing ever happened here, and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it's just a good, wholesome place. In many respects, it still is, just a lot busier now.
Mm-hmm. I can say I usually go to a gaming convention every year in Columbus called Origins. And when I first went there back in the early 2000s, it was quite the culture shock for me coming from the great GTA area of Hamilton, Ontario, because there was like, there was white people and there was black people. And that was all I saw when I came.
Yeah.
And now it's much more cosmopolitan. You'll see like Indians, but it was just it was like wasps and black people, not... I never saw any Greeks or Italians or anyone else there. That was so different.
Didn't we meet up for dinner? I think that's something Bike Club Contessa.
Yes, we did.
I thought so.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, several years ago now.
Yep.
I thought so.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, when you mentioned the gaming convention, now I remember where I saw you. So.
Mm-hmm. Don?
Yeah, it's a very different city. Oh gosh, people from all over the world here, including New Yorkers. That's what really started it. You may have heard of a fellow the name of Les Wexner. He started the limited brands, Victoria's Secret, and all that. He's from here.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early 90s, he had already gotten tired of the New York taxes and regulations for the corporate side, not so much the fashion side. So he upped and moved a whole bunch of New Yorkers here, and we've never been the same since. Traffic got a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
There's the movie Goodbye Columbus, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the song.
Yeah. Well, Don here's a bit of an East Coast transplant himself, growing up on the East Coast and now living in California.
That's right.
Oh dear, that's a long way to go.
Yeah, well, I grew up on Long Island, which is actually pretty nice. I didn't know it at the time, but yeah, it was actually pretty nice, and eventually made it out Silicon Valley.
Yep. And now my next question: why did you become a conservative? Were you always conservative? Like,
I think I went way past conservative a long time ago. I'm well into curmudgeon territory. Kind of always grew up that way. There was never a time I was really ever inclined to be anything but. I grew up watching my father run his own businesses, and just the travails of that. I suppose it's in the blood. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of Democrats in my family, going back for many generations. my grandfather, my dad's father, said he had been fairly apolitical. He was from Minnesota, and when still a low-level local hack, Hubert Humphrey asked him for a bribe, and that was the day my grandfather decided he would never vote Democrat. So,
Wow, go to the top, man.
Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Okay. My next question for you is, we switched up the question. So if there was one state in the United States that you would saw off or just say, hey, you guys, it's not us, you, it's us, and kick them out of the union, which state would that be and why?
I've been having trouble narrowing that one down between Delaware and Rhode Island. Dropping Delaware just because, well, I mean, that's Joe Biden's state, and I lived for a few years in Philadelphia, and the only thing we knew about Delaware was that it was a good place to buy booze, and they had a lot of freeways. So I don't see what point the state has now. And Rhode Island's kind of the same thing. You can almost hold your breath driving through it. They ought to just absorb it into Connecticut.
Okay. My next question is, how did you end up on Ricochet? Why did you join?
Back in 2010, I guess it would be 2010, I had seen links to what was then their only podcast, I guess they now call the flagship, popping up all the time on National Review, and so I started listening in on that, and I guess it's April or so of 2011, I decided might as well join up and see what the fun was.
Okay, and the last question I had here from the kind of things, what is the thing you most like about being on Ricochet?
It's the great variety of people and life experiences, because no matter how well read or well studied you think you are on a subject, you're going to encounter, if you get out there, people who know more about it than you, or who ask questions about your knowledge that you'd never thought to ask. So there's the camaraderie of the people, but there's also the never-ending challenge of it.
Okay. Any follow-ups there, Don?
Oh, well, it's actually, we get that a lot, right? And sure enough, that is that does seem to be a major attribute of Ricochet. We have folks with expertise in some really interesting areas, and some even more interesting life experiences, how they got that expertise. And gosh, it's appreciated. There are all sorts of examples in the member feed.
Yep. And I guess my next question, or we'll get into, is that I know you're involved on, we have various groups on Ricochet that not everyone deals with. So I'm not, though I have personally converted to Anglicanism a few years ago, I haven't gotten deep diving into the religious thing. It was just more of a personal thing for me. But I know that you're involved in some of the religious groups on Ricochet Skipsul, and I know that you're had a very interesting conversion recently. And can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. I'm not actually. I kind of get more involved with some of the occasionally when I have time. The member posts. I'm not too much into the groups.
Okay.
Other than the prayer thread and its various forms, I keep tabs on that. The actual groups, not too heavily involved in. I have from time to time dipped my toe into the Catholic group, but mostly just to ask some questions or share some news. But I'm not really active in it.
Okay. But like I said, you also went down a very interesting conversion recently. Do you want to talk about that then?
Yeah, I definitely could. There are a lot of different approaches I could take to it. It's because I know the path I went down is sort of unusual, although it seems more common among Ricochet members than it would be among the general populace. John Gabriel being among the more recent ones. But I have always been a history enthusiast, and I remember in high school being fascinated when at the prospect of what you would always see on the maps on the fringe of things as the Eastern Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. And by and large, they would get a mention here and there, but by and large, nobody would talk about it. And it wasn't until my senior year of high school, when I was taking a military history class, when we spent probably a good week talking about their contributions to battlefield tactics, to military writing, strategy, and how that evolved over time, and the continuity with the Roman system that we just finished studying. Mm-hmm. And I come to find out my teacher was this was actually an area that he was interested in. There were a few books that had come out at that time. John Julius Norwich's Byzantium series, the first 2 volumes were out at that time. So I just started reading in there, and you can't study that history without constantly encountering the Eastern Orthodox Church. The two go hand in glove. Mm-hmm. And this is the early 90s. There's no internet. From a religious point of view at that time, I didn't really know what I believed. My father had kind of lapsed in a way. I mean, believing, I don't need to go to church at all. My mother, after going through a crisis of faith of her own, was in the process of joining the Catholic Church. But I didn't really have any other resources. Like I said, I didn't really know what I believed. So I go off to college and sort of wend my way back into Christianity. But I'm going to college in Grove City, Pennsylvania, which is the middle of nowhere, PA at the time. A very strong Presbyterian country. So it's one of those things I just sort of set it aside. And over the years, was never really content in the churches I was going to. And when we hit the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, I started really looking hard into things again and said to myself, maybe this wasn't such a hot idea. So many of the churches we'd been to were basically little islands in the sea of churches, and without a lot of, I mean, yeah, they would do things with other churches, but each church was basically a rule unto itself. And I knew I had to be in a larger communion of Christians from around the world. It wasn't good to be separate. That really only left a couple of choices, and for various theological reasons, I eventually found myself re-examining orthodoxy from 20 years before and asking a lot of questions, and started going and never looked back.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, like Eastern Orthodoxy, I've never really looked into it much more than just what, like how you said, like with the Byzantine history. Though I did have a game once where I played in where there was some of the stuff about, when the fall of Constantinople happens and the 2 priests walk into the wall in the Hagia Sophia and are supposed to come back, and when it happens they'll get Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy back on the same page. But yeah, so I know a little bit about the mythology, I suppose.
So
Uh,
you said yourself you went the Anglican route. What took you there?
what happened one day is in fact, over the years, I always made fun of Anglicans. They're the church that gets formed because the king wants a divorce, and Henry VIII says, "Screw it, I'm going to go make my own church with hookers and blackjack." That old joke. And no, but then one day a card comes in the mail, and it's from the local Anglican cathedral, and they're like, "Hey, do you need more fellowship in your life?" And I said, "Yeah, you know what? I'll come down and I'll see what's going on." And I just kind of like, I enjoyed the people and the pomp and pageant without all the bad things with Catholicism. So like a good example is Anglican confession is not going into a booth with a priest and telling them all your sins. Anglican confession is the priest gets up in front of everyone and recites a prayer where we all read along with him. And it's basically, we're sorry, God, that we're not worthy of being, we're all sinners, and that we have not lived up to your ideas, but we're going to promise to try harder. And then it goes into the peace. And it's just that kind of thing. Like, it seemed to be all the good things of Catholicism without any of the negative problems that I've seen looking into Catholicism. And I just like the people, and I like the fellowship, and it helped me. It was in the last few years of my father's life, so it was like good to have this community around me at that time.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Orthodox confession is a bit different than either. It's in some respects a little closer to the Catholic method in that it's one-on-one with a priest, but you stand in front of the iconostasis with the priest, and you're confessing your various falls and struggles, but it's also very conversational. I mean,
Okay.
I've had Yoda quoted at me, for instance, and it wasn't at all what I had feared or expected. Although Saint John of Kronstadt, who was a tremendous Russian cleric near the end of the Russian Empire, and near the end of his life had become a priest of such high renown and known as a miracle worker in his own lifetime, that his cathedral church would be so crowded on Sundays. They might have thousands of people, and he just said, "I can't take individual confessions anymore." So before the start of the liturgy, he would stand in front of the congregation and lift up his stole, and then give everybody a minute or two to just shout out everything, and then do a mass absolution. He was a sort of figure that could do that, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But fascinating fellow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, now we are going to get, I think we've really explored this. Maybe, I know Dawn has some various questions for you and wants to talk about, especially since that recent article you did on that got to the main feed about how we can't break away with China so easily.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as some of us know, my background is both electrical engineering and software engineering and music. And we've seen just the way electronics is built lately. It's just been changing so much, and it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. Oh, yeah. And here you are in the business full time. Tell us about it.
It's been an interesting field. I've grown up in it. I'm not an engineer myself. I veered off into other subjects, and now I just manage engineers. But I remember my father started his first successful electronics business. He had a failed one before that, before I was born. But he started his first successful one in our garage when I was 2. And then went on to have a couple of others, and the first one he had a partner that provided the capital, but they didn't always get on very well, and eventually he sold out of the business because it was either that or they'd end up murdering each other.
Happens.
Yeah. And so, but I remember watching that and getting to tour the plant, or the plants, I should say, as it grew, because I started, they were in the garage for a couple of years, then smaller rented quarters and larger rented quarters. And it was always fascinating getting to tour those places. I learned, if you see something black and shiny, don't put your hand in it because it's probably uncured potting. And when, for one of his businesses, he needed prototypes built, and it was on a weekend. So he brought home some soldering irons and bins of parts and set my sister and I down at the kitchen table, along with my mother, who used to do a lot of the assembly work in the early days, and was just having us solder this stuff together all weekend. Learned real quick what not to do. So, always grown up around it. I remember how large the components were at the time.
Right.
The through-hole resistors, the big radial leaded electrolytic caps. Learned real quickly to pay attention to the polarity on those. And, yeah, got yelled at
because they explode otherwise.
Yes. Oh, yes. But I also remember the size of the magnetics at the time too. The products my father developed were in a similar business to what we're doing now. We supply the work truck industry, and he was dealing with a lot of big power converter things, inverters, battery equalizers, and so forth. And the magnetics on them were massive at the time. And when we look at what we do now, how much smaller even those have gotten. Different techniques, planar transformers, and there's a circuit board company we use that, just as a way of showing off what they could do, their owner had come down and was showing me this 20-layer circuit board, and he said, "You guess what this is?" He said, "It's a winding sort of transformer. All we do is we put a core down, the customer puts a core down the middle of it." But they've done all the windings in stacked layers of on a PCB, which is amazing. I didn't ask what the quality control process was on that, but it truly is fascinating. When I look now at what we build, I have 7 full-time assemblers, and for what they put out in a week, without even breaking a sweat, is probably 10 times what those same 7 people could have been able to do 20 years ago, before the surface mount machines got to be as affordable as they are.
Right. So for some of the folks at home here, over the years, and I guess, it goes from like the 50s, right? Early vacuum tubes, point-to-point wiring, which is literally what it was. And moving to circuit boards, moving from vacuum tubes to transistors, moving to integrated circuits. Each time we have the technology drives us to these smaller and smaller packages. Because we're trying to cram, basically trying to cram a lot more circuitry in there, and then we hit the surface mount concept, surface mount technology, which was just amazing. So for the folks at home, in the old days, we used to have circuit boards, and all the components had little leads on them, little wires, and pop them in, and the traces on the board make all the appropriate connections between these. But in surface mount, the components available with just these little tips sticking up, and it goes right on top of the board without going through holes. And it allowed just tremendous miniaturization. You don't have to waste board space on holes. And then the robot pick and place machines that would place these things. And that technology zoomed. It just zoomed.
Oh yeah.
And to see it change over the years is just remarkable.
Yeah, it really is. And it's not just the speed of the placement. I mean, anyone who's had to do a lot of hand soldering has probably also had to hand form those components or use special benders and tools. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember in the mid '90s being put to work on summer jobs where I would grab a big cardboard reel of 1,000 resistors, and then I'd have to slap that thing in a part bender, make sure I got the pitch exactly right, and have that reel exactly centered. Otherwise, things would go pear-shaped. And then just stand there turning the crank while the thing would spit parts into a bin, and then just having to sit there and one at a time pick up that resistor, shove it into a board, and you just do that for hours on end. And that's before you would even solder anything. You would just you'd stuff 20 or 30 boards at a time and into the slide line, and then the next person down the line might be just all they would be doing would be just soldering joints, slide the board along. I mean, it was, and that was considered high speed.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it's sort of like Moore's law in the mechanical aspect of things. It just actually there's a really interesting thing here. It's sort of like an economic feedback loop here, because every time we find a way to manufacture electronics more efficiently, it pays off, and we can electronics more efficiently, and that allows more possibilities, more kind of products, more things. Things can fit in applications you couldn't have before. And what you mentioned before about the power controller market, that also has gone through something similar to Moore's law, because there, where we went to switch mode power supplies, which again, for the folks at home, instead of using a transformer to go from 60 hertz, 100 volts to whatever you need, run at about, I don't know what it is nowadays, but like half a megahertz. And you need the tiniest magnetic cores to go with that. And so the whole power supply can be shrunk tiny. And it was the development of these special high-speed, high-power field effect transistors which enabled that. Yeah. And so it's a whole big tumble of these technologies. That's just so cool.
It is. It's really fascinating. One of my father's early products was his two big products early on were inverters. An inverter is a device that converts your, say, 12 or 24 volt battery, which is going to give you DC, into a usable AC current. And people have been pursuing that for a very long time, because when you're on a vehicle, sometimes you want to just be able to plug something in. And the problem
this is really difficult with older technology. It's really, really difficult.
And
oh man.
The problem they had early on, when they had these things in the 70s, and they were not very good. Then prior to that, they had what was called the ready line generator, which would be where you basically apply your 12 or 24 volts to a giant electric motor to get your AC. I mean, you talk those things, maybe you'd get 60% efficiency on them, and they were loud.
They vibrate.
They vibrate. Well, and as of a decade ago, some municipalities still spec'd those in favor of solid state inverters on things like ambulances. Believe it or not, one of our customers was still having to build with ready line generators 10 years ago, which really was surprising.
Hey, some little variation on that. Remember, like early car days of automobiles, when you had a radio, AM/FM radio, that was powered by vacuum tubes.
Mm-hmm.
So a car's battery is 12 volts, and the vacuum tubes need a couple hundred volts to work.
Right.
And so they actually had a thing, I think it was actually called a vibrator.
Yeah.
And I guess it cranks the 12 volts up to a little transformer to the 200 or so
Yeah.
volts for the radio. And that's the kind of crap you had to go through to get vacuum tubes on board your car.
Wow.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. I'm very sorry, Boss Mongo. I am totally failing to keep them in check. So that's my fault.
The early inverters, even when they were trying to get it in solid state in the late 70s, they had a problem where the more loads you put on, they still couldn't really get away from the DC problem that we have too many loads in series, everything gets dimmer.
Yeah.
And so one of the and the frequencies would go off. They couldn't maintain line frequency, the 120 hertz that you get on your wall. So that was actually one of my dad's first patents. It was an inverter that would not frequency shift or drop out as you added loads. And
nice.
The thing was, I remember some of these early ones. You're talking maybe 1,000-watt inverter, and the thing would be, I don't know, the size of the drawer of a filing cabinet. They were huge, and I was in just a batteries plus type store, and they had 1,000-watt inverter made in China, but it's a quarter the size and it's $300. When in 1983 those were retailing in $1983 for about 1,000. So it's just impressive the way things have gone now today.
Absolutely, it's great. And so so in your particular business,
Mm-hmm.
your particular shop there, what are the most interesting technological improvements you've seen there right now?
The biggest ones have been in the power MOSFETs. The MOSFET, the metal oxide field effect transistor, is a type of solid state transistor. Actually, if you crack them open, look at the dies, it's arrays of thousands of them. But those can switch high power, and they the efficiencies on these things, my goodness. We have a DC contactor that uses an older design FET in it. This sucker, in free air, we don't even heat sink this thing. I mean, there's an aluminum case it sits in, but in free air, this sucker can run 200, 300 amps at 12 volt DC, and you can hold it. And it uses an older FET design.
Wow.
That was originally made by Siemens, and then they spun off their power division into a company that's now called Infineon. They finally had to stop making that part a couple of years ago. Not because there wasn't a market for it, but it used an old die technology, and the company that made the equipment that Infineon bought said they weren't going to support the equipment anymore. So Infineon comes to us and they say, well, we have this new FET, and the thing's a quarter the size. I mean, and can carry the same current. And we found that this wasn't necessarily true. The older designs had so much metal in them that they were basically self-heat sinking. And these new ones, you got to get the heat out of them. Yeah, they can carry that current if you have them bolted to a giant heat sink. So the big challenge for us, and this will be coming out in about a month's time, we're starting to sell them here and there to select customers, is a new version of our contactor. We had to come up with an entirely new way of assembling this that we actually were just issued the patent on a couple of weeks ago. We're very excited about that one. So it allows us to make 200 amp contactors even smaller than we had before.
And the main issue here was solving the heat problem with the new device.
What I can say we figured out how to do is we are soldering the parts directly to. One of the things is you have to provide a mechanical fastener. Somebody's got to be able to bolt cables to these products.
Yeah.
And part of our patent includes actually soldering right to the lugs.
All right.
It's actually it's hard to explain, but if I showed you, it's pretty slick.
Okay.
Very cool.
If you do have well, I guess you can't show us anything because it's all one pending patent, but maybe one day we'll have like a video of that we can look at.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. We're excited about that one, and they'll be hitting the market in a few weeks for. So, anyone in the work truck industry will see it.
Now, everybody's so the talk of all this stuff was sort of put this all in the limelight is the issues of China, and now China's manufacturing is just again it's such a success story for China, really. Famously, Deng Xiaoping took over from Mao's wife, I guess, in 1981, made a presentation where he said, "We're going to try an experiment. We're going to try to encourage free trade and trade with the West, and encourage people to do whatever they wanted to do. We're not going to dictate which crops grow in which provinces and all that." And that started in 81, and over the next 30 years or so, everything changed radically, and we saw the buildup of China as industrial powerhouse, manufacturing giant. Certainly, the good news about that, and there is some really good news, is that before this point, China had an 85% poverty rate, the way they measure international poverty rate, about $2 a day or whatever. That China had like an 85% poverty rate. And then 30 years later, they were down to a 15% poverty rate. So this industrial buildup basically pulled 600 million people out of poverty, which, pretty good by any measure. But at the same time, it created a pollution nightmare, and it messed up with our manufacturing. And our government hasn't helped in the meantime.
No.
So, talk about China, please.
It's one of those things where I think people tend to oversimplify it in their minds. We see so much in the way of consumer goods where we look on the back and we see, oh, made in China. Yeah, that's true, but it probably in a lot of cases should say assembled in China, because people are sending parts to China in many cases, particularly the lower down the food chain you go. The more sophisticated the product, the more likely the parts inside came from all over and then simply were sent to China to actually be put together.
Right. There's several categories of these things, right? There's like the low tech stuff you buy at Target or stuff, your general things. And then there's like stuff that involves some technology and some electronics manufacturing that you do.
Yeah. And there are a tremendous number of contract houses in China that, we get approached by them all the time. It's, well, send us your bill of materials, send us your design, and in 6 months we'll have your product. That's one of the rubs, is we tell them 6 months is a bit long for us to wait. Sometimes, and it's amazing the number of companies that will do it. We had a competitor of ours do a knockoff of one of our designs, and we got a hold of some of their copies later, and you could tell that they were kind of imitating what we'd done. But they hadn't designed a lick of it in-house. They'd simply sent our stuff over to China, paid some Chinese engineers and a Chinese contract house to design it, build it, send it over here, and then they slap a sticker on it. That happens an awful lot, and it's an amazing the number of U.S. companies that do this. And it's that's actually one of the more common things. People talk about the Chinese intellectual property theft, and it is a real thing.
Mhm.
Chinese counterfeiting is another huge problem that we are constantly battling. We're always getting asked by our customers, how do you know you're not getting counterfeit parts? And because there's all these massive anti-counterfeiting initiatives now, because it's such a huge problem with anything that touches China.
Mm.
What a lot of people also don't realize about China is how eager US companies have been to actually throw things at them. We were getting hit for a long time with a couple of potential customers. They'd be demanding, well, what's your outsourcing strategy? We don't have one. Well, we think your prices are too high. I said, well, the prices are what they are. Well, if you sent them to China, they wouldn't be so high. I said, you're here because you were using a competing product that you got out of China. You were paying that kind of price. Were you very happy with the quality? But they don't care. For them, the driving thing is cost, cost, cost.
Mhm.
And long-term consequences be damned. I mean, as long as it survives the warranty period with their customers, and then they can sell a replacement part and line their pockets. Incredibly short-sighted thinking.
Mhm.
And we can fault China for all sorts of manufacturing intellectual property sins. They get freight subsidies to ship stuff to us. That's something a lot of people don't realize. You order, my kids are always wanting to order plush stuffed toys from favorite cartoon characters, and the stuff's being shipped right from China. Amazon's just brokering the deal. And it's $6 for shipping, and it's here in 7 days. My goodness, if I tried to send that back to China, it would cost me $40.
Right.
And people don't realize that the U.S. has these incredibly odd import rules. So much of the problem with China is just stuff that we have done to ourselves.
Mhm.
Right.
And if we want manufacturing back, well, then that means we're going to have to make some other decisions. Either pay a bit more for things or accept other trade-offs. And that has to be part of it. I don't know how many people are really willing, really understand that. They'll say, well, let's ban imports from China. Well, that's not going to work either.
Right. Well, it depends on the market too. Consumer stuff tends to be super price sensitive, just crazy price sensitive.
Mhm.
And more industrial markets, not so much.
Mhm.
And over here, I'm in Silicon Valley here. If people, if like startups are doing, talking to investors, and it's a hardware startup, the automatic assumption is it's going to be manufactured in China.
Yep.
And there are special accelerator groups here. There's one called PCH, I think, that works with startup companies and works with Chinese manufacturers to build up their prototypes and get their product into manufacturing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all just kind of assumed that it'll be manufactured in
is.
China.
I know a few years ago I was talking to a major industrialist in Hamilton. Now he's sold off his business, and it's still named after his family, but he doesn't do it anymore. Now he's like a miniature Elon Musk type, doing like all his own, like building his own solar car. But I asked him one time like about price of electricity, because in Ontario where I live, that was a big thing at the time, and he said, electricity is not a big problem for my company. What my company problem is that if I go to China, they will give me 3 cents a liter on gas or something like that, versus the $1 a liter I'm paying here in Canada. Now, the only reason I'm not moving all my stuff to China and dealing with that kind of stuff is I don't want my kids living in China. And we just don't think about all the policies that are out there. And I do agree with the president on your president on the simple thing of just hitting them with a tariff on the short term. Is one way of discouraging people from doing this. And it seems his trade wars seem to be working a bit. The only other thing I see is that China really shot themselves in the foot over this COVID crisis.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
And
although that's just kind of recent, but yeah,
I remember there was a recent post on Ricochet talking about Claire Belinsky, and she's a former member, contributor of some note. And I was getting her letter, and she freaked out one day because some American had come in during the early days of the crisis and bought 2 million masks that were destined for France on the table. And she was like, how dare the U.S. government do this? And then I later find out it's like the owner of the New England Patriots did it as a favor to the city of Boston and the governor of Massachusetts. And then 2 weeks later, I read articles about how the 2 million masks and other equipment that they bought on this airplane were garbage.
Yeah.
And we spent all this money buying crappy stuff from China, and I'm half convinced they intentionally sent us crap because they wanted to make the virus worse for us.
That I wouldn't doubt that at all. It's different on the industrial side. They can't afford to do that too overtly or too long. But there are stories out there. There was a story I read about a decade ago of a plastics company. No, sorry, it was, what do they make? It was hand lotion or something like that here. And they went to a Chinese plastics company to get the bottles. And the plastics company agreed to, given wall thickness, given materials, and so forth. And the first few shipments of the bottles were fine. Then they started thinning them out, a little bit of each shipment until they started rupturing. And it wasn't because it wasn't really a money thing necessarily, because the amount of plastic that they were saving really wasn't that big of a cost. In plastics, it's not so much the material price, unless you're using something exotic, it's how much time it takes to run on the presses or the blow molds. It was just, we pulled a fast one. It was an ego thing.
Yep.
So yeah, it's little things like that you got to watch. It always makes me really leery of doing business there, because sometimes you get a good one and sometimes you get a schnook, and you just don't know until they get caught.
Or from a manufacturing point of view, it's, what do we do with all the stuff that doesn't pass QA, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's one of the big problems on the counterfeiting market is in the electronics, if you look at a chip, all you see is a black or grayish square or rectangle that has a bunch of little tiny metal legs coming out around it. And inside that, those legs you're going to find are attached to a frame, and each leg has a very tiny wire that goes from that leg stretched across to a point on the chip inside. It's called the chip inside is called the die. Yeah, and the wire it's wire bonding or die bonding, and a lot of those dies are not made in China. They are made all over the place. They just happen to get sent to China for the final die bonding and packaging. And what some of these die bonding houses are doing, because they also had the equipment to laser mark the outside of the finished thing, was they were simply stuffing empty lead frames into epoxy molds, laser zapping them, and then selling them off the back of a truck. So that stuff you definitely have to watch for. They were basically stealing lead frames and just so different people could make a few bucks on the side. Got to the point where some job shops around the world were putting in x-ray machines. They would x-ray every reel of parts before they'd slap it on the machine, because you can't afford to put down 2,500 regulators that don't have anything in them.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you have an x-ray machine?
No, actually, we
Nope.
don't. The distributors we buy through all certify, and that none of their stuff has fallen off the back of the boat. I avoid the brokers.
I kind of meant it that some manufacturers have an X-ray machine for checking boards for circuit boards for defects and things, and maybe you could double use that.
We've avoided assembly technologies that would require that so far.
Right.
The chief culprit among there would, of course, be the BGAs, and yeah, we don't want to touch those if we don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have to invest in the reworks. VGAs, if we go back to the chip and you see all the legs sticking out, the BGA, to get more lines in and out of a chip, you don't see any legs sticking out the side. You flip it upside down and you'll see a bunch of metal balls on it. It's called a ball grid array, or BGA.
Okay.
Those things, if you solder them right, they're great. They're compact. If you have even one of them not solder, good luck.
Don't even try
that.
Don't even try. Just
yeah. So yeah, we don't touch BGAs if we don't have to. Let that be somebody else's problem.
Nightmare if it's not perfect. What kind of quantities you deal with?
With us, the highest volume products are going to be in the 18 or so thousand a year range. We make some small smart relays basically, and those, yeah, we're probably ship around 18,000 a year on those. Most other products, the next highest volume are going to be 8,000 or 9,000 a year. We have some product lines it's just a couple hundred a year, various specialty controllers and things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and is it mostly electronics, circuit board based?
Yeah, it all is. We have, I mean, that or the wiring harnesses that go with them, but I don't have a harness shop in house. I source those outside. Wire harness works an art unto itself, and you need the right people and space and all that for it. Actually takes up rather a lot of space to do it right.
And what's the most labor intensive thing right now in your business?
Probably the final assembly of products. There are, once you have a circuit board populated, you still have to interface to the outside world. And some, if it's a small terminal, you can solder that at the same time as you're doing your other components. Anytime you get into high power, you're attaching lugs. Those have to be bolted on with an air driver, or you're dealing with much larger connector blocks that still are through-hole soldered, and those somebody's got to sit there and either hand solder them, or we have a selective solder machine, which is basically a robotic solder fountain that zaps them. Then they have to be tested, glued or epoxied or potted into cases, and then maybe some additional hardware put on. So it's all in that final assembly stuff. That's where most of the work is. The actual populating of the boards is one or two guys running the line for the day, stuffing boards. Everything else, all the other people are just there to do the hand assembly work and test and all that.
Do you do any machine vision kind of, taking a photograph of the things being built and doing like machine vision analysis, looking for defects?
Not really, no. I mean, the pick and place machines have cameras on them, and so that they can spot the parts coming down. Otherwise, we're just doing visual inspection at the end of the line. Our boards aren't so complicated that we need the machine inspection. I mean, we looked at them. They're called AOI machines. What is that? Automatic optical inspection. Those machines are still like 200 grand for a good one. And then you need somebody trained and qualified on operating it, because every one is different. And so you need to have enough volume to justify putting one of those in, where you can have a full-time operator of just your AOI. So we don't get into that. If there are,
I think we'll see a lot of advances in that area.
Oh yeah, they're better now than they were a decade ago. The false positive rate on them is coming way down. They just aren't quite they're still not worth the investment for us.
Mm.
And if there are defects, they almost always come out and test. The rare exception, it would be like a cold solder joint's about the only thing that's not going to reliably be caught. Everything else, if a resistor's off its pad, the unit's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Have you seen any real disruptions in the supply chain during the virus?
Oh yeah, we were seeing disruptions before the shutdowns hit here, and it was weird the kind of stuff that would happen. We were getting notices that, of all things, cardboard shortages in China were delaying shipments. Because the parts come on reels, the reels get packed in cardboard sleeves, and Wuhan happened to be sort of one of China's paper capitals. So you talk about a weird
cardboard capital of the world.
Yeah. So yeah, cardboard. And we always have to watch out for Chinese New Year anyway on account of some components, LEDs in particular, anything, because China has long cornered the market on LEDs.
Yeah.
But it was always the weird stuff. The tariffs have caused us more disruption than the COVID has. That they've been a major headache.
Yeah.
But the COVID stuff, in coming as it did, coinciding with Chinese New Year, it made it a little worse, but not too bad.
Didn't help that my country, Canada, was also having major rail disruptions all over the place during the last month, right up into the virus, right through January and February.
Rail disruptions, you say?
Yeah, well, there was a bunch of protests that people were having on railway because of a pipeline that was going to get built. So they started shutting down railways all over the country, and it was a fun time. So I was like, hey, I'm in Ontario. All our grocery food is coming up from Buffalo, so I'm not that worried about this. I had worked 20 years 18 years in logistics in the grocery business, and then 2 years for Toyota. And I had a good idea of what was going to happen when the rail lines all got disrupted. And yeah, like ships were getting bottled up in harbor. And I guess it was just fun times all around.
We did have a few disruptions last year when there was, I guess, something of a longshoreman strike or disruption, work slowdown, whatever they call it, out in Port of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And eventually what happened was a lot of the freighters waiting to get in to unload decided to hoof it south to Mexico. And suddenly the strike was over.
Yep.
But that caused a few delays. We were waiting on some parts at one point that were on one of those ships, and calling up our distributor, "Where are they?" And they said, "Still somewhere on the ocean."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand.
What do you think of? I'm sorry.
I was just going to put in an anecdote from my time when I was working at Toyota. This happened before I got there, but I understand someone forgot to put in the right part, and halfway through their production run, they had to start flying parts up from California to replace that. So even the smallest thing can stop a 20. What was it? We were building like 1,500 cars a day.
Oh, my best friend from high school is a QC manager for one of the big three Detroit builders. And one of his QC nightmares a couple of years ago had to do with carpet, the automotive carpet. There were 3 suppliers to this particular line, depending on the model and the trim and all that. Mm-hmm. Within 1 month, one flooded, one burned to the ground, and the other one they were moving across the state, and they didn't have the new plant up and running right, or have the people running. So they had this supplier agreement going that if they shut down the line, it was $20,000 an hour fine. It was cheaper for them to charter helicopter flights directly from their plant to the nearest big city airport, where they chartered private jets, to fly this automotive carpet up to the plant. And they did that for 3.5 weeks.
Wow.
And that was still cheaper than shutting down the plant.
Yep.
So he said it was one of the worst months of his life because he was trying to deal with all three different carpet suppliers. He said, I now know more than anyone else inside this company about carpet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just giving you guys a 5-minute warning about our hour-long timeline. So, but I'll let you guys get back to it.
Here's one. What do you think about manufacturing in Mexico? And the reason I ask is I went to a talk by his name is Chris Anderson, the fellow who founded 3D Robotics, the folks who do the drone electronics, and he set up his manufacturing in Tijuana.
Yeah.
And he says that Tijuana is the next. He said it. This was some years ago, 4 years ago or so. That Tijuana is the next Shenzhen because it's so close, same time zone. They got good engineers there. They know how to manufacture. Food's good. What's your opinion on Mexico and manufacturing?
I've heard very good things about it. It sort of depends on the security level of the region you're aiming for. I have dealt with a couple of cable houses down there. I have to say the quality I got out, and maybe this was down to language barrier issue, I don't know, but there was one batch of cables with one house. I had to send it back twice to be reworked because they weren't following the print. That's about the extent of my experience with it, though. I think it's one of those where, for a small guy like me, I have to wait until the rest of the infrastructure is established to give it a fair judge. Larger corporations can invest in the plants, they can invest in the training, they can invest in the translation, and really get themselves established. And then, if it pans out well, maybe 8-9 years down the road, that'll be when little guys like me can actually get in there and find contract houses and so forth that we could work with.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
What else? Is there anything on the feed recently, Skipsul, on Ricochet's feed, that has piqued your interest?
I'm trying to think. Last few days, I haven't had a whole lot of chance to keep an eye on it. I'm always keen to see some of the more professional opinions on the current troubles, like Doug Watt's stuff. I always keep a close eye on. What I am noticing is everybody's all anxious about the same stuff right now. Just noting for the last year or so, you could throw something up on the member feed and it would still be on that first page, sometimes 2 days later.
Yeah.
And now with the churn, you put something up at noon and it's on to the middle of page 2 by 8. So it's hard to keep track. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. We're running down to the end of the time, so I want to just ask you, who would you like to see us interview next?
I have been racking it. There are so many good names. Doug Watt, I think, would be an excellent choice, especially given his years of police experience on this. But if he's not available, Gary McVeigh is full of all sorts of interesting knowledge on the entertainment industry. I swear he's got a story for everything. It's hard to narrow it down, but yeah, I think those would be among the first two I'd be wanting to hear from next.
Okay, good. I know Gary's someone else that I would like to see as well, just talk to people. And I want to get from perspectives from all sides. Not necessarily, there's at least one never Trumper I'm hoping to get on here. His name's escaping me right now, but so I want to see, we get all people on here to share their views and their experiences, because I think that's part of the movement. It's never just the one guy who's in charge at the time.
Yeah.
Someone else will come and be there, and you need to hang together and not just purge each other out like the left does.
Oh yeah, that's been. I saw enough of that from my perspective when I was a moderator. It got nasty there for a while. Uh,
Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to sign us off. This is
okay.
Dave March from Land of Confusion, and
Don Tillman from, oh, well, California.
oh, do you want to do? There is one more thing
Yeah.
because you were fooling around with it a little earlier there, Don. Maybe you want to do an outro for us with your guitar for Boss Mongo.
Not set up for it right now,
Okay.
but sometime later maybe I'll just.
Okay. We'll definitely have to get some sort of jam session. I have not played the clarinet in like 25 years, so I would not even know what to do. But
I
thanks
could
for
play an
watching
off-key kazoo, but you probably don't want to hear that.
Okay, I'm just gonna. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on Land of Confusion.
Bye, folks.
There we go.
Excellent.
Recording.